Do we have everybody?
I think, yeah, we can probably get started here. So, here, I'll start. So, all right, well, I want to welcome Paul back. It's always good to have him here. We've asked him to do a little training today on harassment. When we tend to think of harassment, generally we think of, you know, the sexual variety of harassment. But there's more and more cases where employees are feeling harassed in not a non-sexual manner. So we're going to be covering the sexual part, but also just harassment in general. And as supervisors, obviously, that's something that, you know, when you...
All right, hang on. We've got too much going on.
Yeah.
Hey, Amos, would you mute your microphone?
Okay.
There you go.
All right.
So yeah, as supervisors, you may come across, you know, when you're disciplining or something, then, you know, they'll come up and say that, you know, retaliation or harassment or bullying or things like that. So it is a topical training that we're going to have today, and it is something that I'm afraid that we're going to probably have here at some point in the Three Rivers. So with that, I'll turn it over to Paul.
Great. Thank you, Robert. And Dave, I just wonder why, you know, maybe sometime you can bring me back for an exciting and interesting topic as opposed to drug and alcohol and sexual harassment. So, you know, I just...
You live in the HO world, you know, it's going to be exciting.
I could find something. So...
What was the word? Riveting?
Riveting, yes. So we're gonna talk about three things here today in the next 2 hours. We're gonna talk about what everybody in this room understands, which is sexual harassment. We're gonna talk about harassment in general, and then we're gonna talk about bullying. As Robert alluded to, what's interesting is with this topic, there's always somebody out there who's like, you know what, I can say whatever I want. And my response is, absolutely you can. This is America. That's what makes it a beautiful place. But there are consequences for doing certain things because of policies and laws and all those other wonderful things that we have to deal with in the workplace. And so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about those things that might be offensive to some and not to others. And that gets real important. But Robert alluded to the fact that we don't see a lot of sexual harassment any longer, especially quid pro quo. We'll talk about that in a minute. Until he handed me this when I walked in the door. And there's two of them. I'm just going to read the funnier one.
Okay.
And it says, how many of your employees are stressed out? Probably a lot of them, says a new study. About 40% of workers reported high stress, according to a new survey. Am I reading the right one? I'm getting there. Oh, no, sorry. This is the other one. So this is on the lighter side. Motorboating boss loses a lawsuit. Anybody read this? It says this female Texas...
I have nothing better to do.
This female Texas constable, that apparently is a police officer, had a certain way with male employees that got her in some serious trouble. First, the constable constantly invited male employees to Chunky Chick Night at the local strip club. Second, oh my God, she liked to motorboat employees when she thought they were having a bad day. That meant putting her shirt over the workers' heads and holding their faces to her breasts and shaking back and forth. Suffice it to say that organization lost a lot of money. I'll give that back to you, Robert. So we're gonna talk about a couple of things, but again, the key here is one, knowledge, and two, understanding that some folks approve and some folks do not approve. You know, I was relating to Robert. We conduct probably on the average of, as an association, we conduct about 2 investigations a month. All of them are basically harassment. Some of them are discrimination, but most of them are harassment. That's how much we get called in to do third-party investigations for harassment claims. Do we have somebody arriving?
I think I
Awesome,
might
man.
have Sky.
Is that you, Sky? Nope,
Nope,
that's
yeah,
Tyler.
Tyler.
Can you hear us, Tyler?
I can.
Okay, good.
Cool. And, you know, this latest one is a very high-profile case, large organization. We believe it's been going on for a long, long time. And so rather than doing the job, rather than doing what we're paid to do, what this individual is spending most of their time doing is finding ways of creating harassment so they don't get caught. And he's very good at it because I'm struggling to come up with what I need. So there's better things to do in life, is my point. And so we're gonna cover all this ground here as we go. So if we can get us back to the computer, wonderful. So can you guys in the remote location see this? Okay.
Yep, sure can, Paul.
Okay, thank you. And down there, you guys can see it on either screen. All right, very good. So it's also in front of you. So if you don't want to get a neck ache, you can just look in front of you as well. And it follows the slides. We are going to talk about these things today. We're going to talk about what laws apply. We're going to talk about the negative effects of harassment in the workplace. We'll talk about 2 forms of sexual harassment. We're going to talk about bullying, retaliation, legal consequences, and how to stop it, how to prevent it from happening in the first place in our organization. So having said that, and now that you are probably in a food coma for lunch, if you turn to the first colored page, which is purple, lavender-ish, go ahead and take this quiz. Go ahead and work together on it, and come up with the best answers you possibly can. All right, let's continue on. I see most everybody's finished. So let's define it, and folks, this is going to get real repetitive because I want to make sure that we get it. So here we go. Sexual harassment is defined as unwelcome behavior of a sexual nature. We'll talk about that specifically. It is conduct that is not of a sexual nature. This is an or. But it is based on gender and has the effect of creating a hostile work environment. So those are the 2 things that we hear about most predominantly is quid pro quo, I'll define it in a bit, and hostile work environment. And then harassment that is based on a protected class, all right? Race, ethnic background, religion, physical, mental capability, gender, marital status, political beliefs. Those are most of them in the state of Montana. There are a few others, and other states have different protected classes. All right? So as I look around the room, for the most part, everybody in the joint is a protected class, either by gender or by age. And then the third component here is workplace bullying. We refer to this as equal opportunity harassment. And we're going to talk about this because this has been a big issue in the school systems across America. And it's been a big issue in the workplace as well. And bullying, by the way, is not illegal. It's not good management practice, but it's not illegal. But there are cases where it becomes illegal, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit. All right, question number 2, true or false? Sexual harassment is illegal and victims can sue for damages.
True.
Okay. What does it mean in the court systems for you all as supervisors to be an agent of the company? When it pertains to harassment, what does it mean when a supervisor is an agent of the company?
They could be sued as well.
Correct. So if we fail to do our jobs as managers in this regard, if we know what's going on, we do nothing about it, or if we participate in it, if there's a lawsuit filed against the company, that claimant can also file a lawsuit against us individually as supervisors. So if nothing else, That's one thing that helps prevent it in the workplace is when supervisors and managers know that they can be held personally liable for it. And it's up to about 10 grand to get your name off a lawsuit today. It's a lot of money. All right, so where does the law come from? On the federal side, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, 1964. There's a few amendments to that act over time. The Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, and then the Age Discrimination from Employment Act. Those are two amendments. On the state side, it's the Montana Human Rights Act, and an amendment to that is the Montana Wrongful Discharge Act. So that's what governs the law at the federal level and the state level. And here's who enforces it. On the federal side, it's the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC. We don't see much of that action here in Montana because we have a fairly rabid Human Rights Bureau in Helena, and they're the ones that handle all of the claims in Montana of harassment and discrimination. All right, other reasons why we as employers and as employees and as organizations should care about this. It's a serious morale buster in the workplace. This organization I'm doing this investigation for right now, I am up to 23 people that I've interviewed so far, 23 in this one department. And there isn't a person of those 23 that I've interviewed that's liking their job right now because of one person. And so it's a pretty serious morale buster in the workplace, and we got to take that seriously. It can also affect employees' promotions in their job. Supervisors, you may lose respect. You may lose the ability to manage your staff if they don't trust you any longer. Productivity, your job, and we talked about supervisors being held liable for harassment. This is really old. I thought I had updated this. My apologies, but even 9 years ago, look at the losses. I think Robert, didn't you do one just recently?
Yeah, well, yeah, there was, I guess, 44 million in just 2013 was a total.
Yeah.
But that's what's listed. There's a bunch that aren't.
Right. And how many cases was that?
Just under 1,000.
Yeah. So that many cases that actually went through the court systems. And then there's probably that many more that settle out of court that we never know about. So it's real dollar values to organizations. When we allow this to happen, it comes right off your bottom line. And unlike wrongful discharge, there isn't insurance for this. If you're guilty, you're guilty. Sorry, I did update it. There's 2013 settlements. Okay, there's just a few of them. $8 million for Costco. Ruby Tuesday Restaurants, $500,000. Bank of America, $39 million for gender bias. $6 million for the UMW or United Motor Workers, and it just goes on from there. There's good use of your. So this one here didn't just hit the organization; it hit your tax dollars. Right here, $17 million for illegal harassment. That case is discrimination. So let's talk a little bit about the sensitivity factor. And if you turn towards the back, there's a pink colored sheet. So go ahead and work your way through that and identify of these items, is this creating an offense for you or no? Ron, you guys, everybody on the outlying areas, are y'all doing okay?
Yeah, we're doing okay.
Paul, I got a question for you.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned Montana Human Rights Commission, and you said they're rabid. So in your opinion, are they, what do you,
What am I basing that
expand
statement on?
Are you saying that
Sure.
you think that they side too much with employees, or what?
Yes, and Montana, as a whole, Montana has, of all 50 states, we're right in the top for the most challenging employment laws. You know, we have a wrongful discharge act, we have the blacklisting statutes, we have a very challenging drug and alcohol testing program in the state of Montana. Every single one of these is designed so that it's favorable to the employee. Now, granted, if you look at our Constitution, which was redrafted in the 70s, in the state Constitution, the very first thing in the state Constitution is, anybody want to tell me? No, even the government class lately? Okay. It has to do with the privacy rights of the citizens in the state of Montana. And that translates then to those same rights for employees. So, you know, it's a real challenge. Is it untenable? No, it's not. But by law, anytime there's a claim of harassment, discrimination, wrongful discharge, and although that's really out of the Human Rights Bureau's purview, that last one, that by law they have to investigate. It's their methods, I think, that I struggle with, and the fear that they instill in employers that I think makes me use that word. So, does that make sense?
Yeah, I was just curious.
Sure.
What your
Now that you're recording this, you can send that to them too. So it's all right. They don't like me already.
I will edit it as appropriate.
So no, they know how I feel about it. So let's take a look at these 5 scenarios. The first one says, one of your coworkers is very involved in her church and likes sharing her religious views at work. Without asking, she places copies of scriptures and religious artifacts at your workstation. So by a show of hands, sorry, I'm not going to look at you guys out there because I can't see you, but by a show of hands from this group, for how many of you is that not offensive? Okay. So,
Especially if the artifacts are edible.
good point. Can I write on here?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So this is number 1, edible artifacts. All right.
Yeah, a little chocolate crucifix there, or marble, or
All right. So, and then for how many of you is this truly offensive? Does it bother you?
Just sort of.
Okay. So we had about this ratio. Okay, number 2. On a regular basis, people bring in donuts or muffins to share with the work group. When Chuck, who's overweight, eats a donut, a few team members snidely say in front of the group, "Do you really need that donut?" Okay, so for how many of you is this not offensive? Okay, it's all right. Okay, for how many of you is this a problem? Okay. Number 3, when people continually ask a person who is visually of age whether they are taking voluntary or early out retirement. Okay? Not a problem. Problem. All right, number 4. In the cubicle next to yours, you overhear 2 people laughing about an excursion to a gay bar. You have a lot of those here in town, don't you? Okay. Just checking. One of them jokingly says, "I thought I was going to get AIDS just by looking at them." How many of this is not offensive?
Okay, now, I'm not saying I'd ever do it. You're asking if I'm offended.
I'm asking, that's right.
Okay.
That's right. How many people does this offend? Okay, last but not least. A male manager was handing out awards at an annual recognition banquet. As recipients came forward, he shook the hands of the men and kissed the women on the cheek. Not offensive. Offensive. Okay.
And he made it to the stage.
Yeah. Interesting enough, one of the cases we're going to talk about here that went from bullying to harassment had to do with just something like this. A lot more extreme, but the key here was that someone perceived that last item as disenfranchising a protected class, women, as opposed to men. That's what somebody saw that as. So what is this? These are percents. What is this telling you all? What's this tell you?
Anybody can be offended by just about anything.
Because I don't think it's the next person.
Right.
It just takes one.
It does. Okay. And here's the interesting thing. When we get to the court systems, God forbid, when we get to the court systems, what the judge, what the case law tells us is that it has nothing to do with the intent of the alleged harasser. It has everything to do with the perception of the person who was allegedly harassed. That is really one-sided, but it's the way it is. And that's the reason why we don't mess with this. And so if we believe that it might offend somebody, and here's my rule of thumb. She's been dead for a number of years, okay? But anytime I think about opening my mouth, and for me that's an easy thing to do, all right? Anytime I think about opening my mouth and something coming out of it that may not be appropriate, I look to my right because my mother is standing next to me, all right? And she was about this tall and she could whip any man I knew for the most part, including my father who was an ex-Marine, okay? So that's my scorecard. And in order to keep me honest, I look at, I look to see if mom's standing there watching me. And that's what keeps me from doing it. So the key here, folks, is that rule number one, as managers, we have to engage our brains before our, okay, all right? And it's no different here with sexual harassment or discrimination. We always think about what we're going to say or do before we do it, 110% of the time, okay? And that gives us the ability to do this if we need to, and just not go there. And it's just a whole lot easier. So engage the brain before their mouth, and then all this just disappears. Bonnie?
Paul, the one thing that I've always said at these trainings is something that I recognize through the years that I've managed, and that is, I may have said I was offended to some of these things, but I would never be offended enough that, it takes a lot to offend me. So what I realized is, if somebody was cracking a joke or something that might have been off color, and I laughed and thought it was really funny, there were a time or two I'd walk back to my office and go, that was not the right thing to do.
What are some of these jokes?
But I think that's
we don't want to hear them in here.
As managers, is because a lot of the times we're not easily offended, so we think, what's the big deal?
Right.
So you kind of got to think of it from that other standpoint, is it's not me I'm looking out for, it's them.
Who else is in the room?
Yeah.
Who else is in my presence?
Right.
Is the problem. And it's, I will tell you, try teaching this subject to construction workers.
Yeah.
It's like, what do you mean I can't say that? I can say whatever, and you know that contractors are bilingual, right? Okay, you'll like this one, Ron. Okay, contractors are bilingual. What two languages do they speak? English and profanity. Okay, and there's always going to be somebody in the room that doesn't like that, always, and you can't weed them out. So you just learn not to do it. It's just easier. So that's the whole key. We could end this right now if everybody understood that if we engage the brain before the mouth, we're done. Okay, we don't have to worry about it any longer because we just didn't go down that path.
Is not offending people, is it only just good practice, or is if I say something that offends Peggy of a gender nature,
okay,
have I then, in the eyes of the law, broken the law? Is her simple offense?
No, and we're going to get to that point,
Okay.
Tim. So we'll get to what it takes for it to be illegal harassment.
I'd like to know right where the limit is.
We'll get you there.
I bet you do.
not so sure he's not already.
Okay, so question number 3 from the quiz said, which of the following is how the courts define sexual harassment in the workplace? Item A, unwelcome sexual advances. Item B, requests for sexual favors. Item C, conduct that is not of a sexual nature but has the effect of creating a hostile work environment. Or item D, all of the above. Okay, very good. You remember that from high school because when you didn't know the answers, you always chose all of the above. Okay. All right, so that is the list of those items. Okay, so what is sexual harassment? So we're gonna go through it again. It must be based on gender and includes conduct of a sexual nature in the workplace that includes any unwelcome, and here's a few of the bullet points, sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature, and display of sexually explicit or suggestive materials. All right. Years ago in my corporate setting, I inherited the transportation division of an oil company, and at the time it was the 4th largest transportation division in the nation. We had maintenance facilities all over the United States. All right, mechanics, truck drivers. What do you think was hanging on the walls of all those maintenance facilities? Calendars. Yeah, well, a little more than calendars. Okay, all right. And you would not believe the ration of crap that I took when I went to visit each one the first time and told them to take all that stuff down. Okay, you know, here's the 90-day vendor coming into my shop telling me to take down my nude posters. Okay, I don't care because it's not your shop. I do believe it belongs to the company you get paid from. So they come down off the wall. Why? Why did I care?
It could have been someone.
Okay, all it took was one client, one vendor, one female truck driver, okay, one male truck driver that didn't like it. Didn't matter. It was offensive to someone. And this is, Tim, where we're beginning to look at when they're all over the wall. I'm faced with it every day. I have to come into work. It's what we refer to as pervasive. It's all the time. Okay, so it's at me all the time. So one of the rules there is it's pervasive. Okay, so here's the other half of this. Conduct that is not of a sexual nature, but is based on gender and has the effect of creating a hostile work environment. So in this case, it's not of a sexual nature, but I'm disenfranchising a protected class. All women, all Native Americans, all blacks, all Asians, whatever it might be. Okay, it's affecting a group. Okay, one person's actions are affecting a group that's protected by law. Number 8, true or false? If the harassment is of a sexual nature and the conduct is unwelcome, is it sexual harassment regardless of the gender of those involved?
Yes.
True.
If the harassment is of a sexual nature and the conduct is unwelcome, is it sexual harassment regardless of the gender?
The giant unmotorboat.
Yes.
And I'm liking it. Is there a problem?
What happened to the engage the brain before the mouth thing? Ron, we're out of control here. All right, so yes, the answer is true, and the reason why is that in the law it's defined as unwelcome. So I don't care whether it's 2 men or 2 women. It is the fact of the matter is that it's unwelcome, and someone doesn't like it. Now, the key here to being unwelcome is what?
They're uncomfortable.
Yeah, but how do I know it's unwelcome?
They haven't told you.
Yeah, so the onus falls back to the employees, and this is going to be an important piece when we get to the end of this. In preventing it in our workplace, we have to empower and educate our employees to learn to say no. Okay? You know, Robert, that was truly offensive. Did you really mean to say that to me? Yeah. Okay. So we need to learn to not be afraid to confront our colleague and say, boy, I sure didn't care for that. And here's why. And that's hard because most of us would rather just turn around and walk away and then let it grind on us for a while. So, all right, so under what circumstances can sexual harassment occur? Victim or harasser can be male or female. The victim does not have to be a member of the opposite sex. The harasser can be a subordinate, a supervisor, subordinate, coworker, client, customer, or vendor. So our job is to protect our employees from any of this list. That's our job. All right, so who can experience sexual harassment? Direct targets, obviously. That's an easy one. Bystanders. Is this something maybe that Bonnie alluded to? You know, I as a manager laughed at that joke, but I didn't take the time to look around at who else in that room might have been affected by it. So that would be bystanders or witnesses to the harassment. Indirect targets. So here's the two definitions of sexual harassment. Quid pro quo in a hostile work environment. All right. Can anybody tell me what quid pro quo is?
This for that.
Okay, this for that. All right. So somebody get real specific in regards to sexual harassment. What's the definition of quid pro quo?
You have a raise if you'll
Sleep with me. Okay. All right. So that is quid pro quo. Fortunately, there's been enough of this education, enough of these lawsuits over the years. We don't see this happening much anymore other than the motorboating incident. Okay? We just don't see it. It's not, that's just an unwelcome, that's a whole other thing. But we don't see, I'll give you a promotion if you date me. Okay? If you don't date me, if you don't sleep with me, I'll demote you. Right? That happened all the time 20 years ago. We don't see it much any longer.
Especially the football coach.
Correct. All right. So you've got it here, something for something or this for that, supervisor or manager requests or demands, and usually it's more of a demand. Sexual favors in exchange for an employment benefit. All right. So here's the definition that's probably right in your policy statement on harassment. That's unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other conduct of a sexual nature is quid pro quo sexual harassment when, item 1, submission to the conduct is made either explicitly or implicitly a term or condition of employment. In other words, do it or there will be consequences for your employment here. And then submission to a rejection of such conduct by the employee is used as a basis for employment decisions that affect the employee. So, oh, you're not going to sleep with me? Then I will terminate you. Okay? So those are very well-defined items in the court systems, and because of it, we just don't see it much any longer. All right, so let's define unwelcome. Did the individual did not solicit or incite the conduct, the individual regarded the conduct as undesirable or offensive. So again, part of your affirmative defense is 1, you have a policy, okay, and 2, in that policy, or at least by process or procedure or protocol at Three Rivers, the rule of thumb is if you feel like you're being harassed, you need to tell somebody about it. Okay, here's a channel for you. Here's where you go with this. Here's how you file a claim. You need to talk to your supervisor. You need to tell the person who's offending you to stop doing it. So what's happening in the court systems now is that if that's not happening up front, there's a greater chance that the employee won't win a harassment lawsuit because they didn't avail of themselves of the policy or the procedure or the protocol of the organization. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Number 4, true or false. You don't have to be the target of the abuse to be a victim of quid pro quo sexual harassment. Okay. How? Remember, quid pro quo is this for that. So how do we create indirect targets of this for that, from this for that?
Proximity, if you're next to where that's happening, I guess that could be considered.
Okay, that would be probably the next one we're going to talk about, which is an offensive, unwelcome, hostile work environment. But how could I be disenfranchised by my boss sleeping with one of my colleagues.
Maybe he's after
She
you.
got the promotion, I did.
Bingo. Favoritism. Okay? So in this particular case I'm working on, of all these folks I keep interviewing, favoritism, favoritism, favoritism. Okay? A lot of it. And so they see it, potentially. Number 6, which one of the following is an example of hostile work environment sexual harassment? Remember, hostile work environment sexual harassment. A male manager reprimanding a female employee in front of a group of peers. Sexual jokes or remarks. A company with only male senior managers.
B.
Okay, absolutely. Okay. Item 1 is what?
It's not okay.
It's just bad management practice, right? Okay. All right.
Still wrong.
Right. And item C is nothing.
Just what it
So,
is.
yeah. Okay, so the other half of sexual harassment, remember we had quid pro quo. Now we come down to a hostile work environment, which is part of what you had defined just a second ago. Unwelcome sexual advances or physical, verbal, or visual acts that are created by anyone in the workplace. Conduct that is not of a sexual nature, but that is based on gender and has the effect of creating a hostile work environment. And widespread sexual favoritism. Okay, so let's take each of these in their own merits. So physical acts, this one's pretty easy. Touching, brushes, pats, hugs, shoulder rubs, accidental collisions, and then assault and rape. So we go from one end of that spectrum all the way to the other end. All right. Verbal acts, and this is usually where we catch this. Off-color jokes, language, or teasing, comments or suggestions of a sexual nature, and repeated requests for a date. Okay. I never recommend dating in your company anyway. So, yeah, that's sorry. That's. I'll draw the line there. And then non-verbal acts, leering stares or gestures, suggestive pictures, posters, calendars, cartoons, excessive attention in the form of love letters, telephone calls, or gifts. Okay? All right. So these are what we refer to as unwelcome sexual advances. Hostile work environment, conduct is not of a sexual nature but is gender specific. All right? So we have members of one sex are exposed to disadvantageous terms or conditions of employment to which members of the other sex are not exposed. All right? Give me an example of this. I have one gender being advantaged or disadvantaged over another.
Male nurse being asked to do the heavy lifting rather than the females
Because he's a man.
because he's a man.
Okay. All right. It's kind of like when we conduct interviews. You know, there's questions that we can't ask, and one of them is a maiden name. Why can't I ask that?
Marital status.
Okay. Would I ask a man that? I would not. So what I'm doing is I'm actually segregating out one gender by asking that question. So it's similar. General hostility to the presence of members of one sex in the workplace. All right. Saw a lot of this after the Second World War, all the way up through and into the 90s, where women were not welcome in the workplace. Period. Especially in, and we see this even today in some sectors, engineering, the executive sector, IT. So it's just it's a man's world, right? Wrong. Okay. And then a pattern of abuse directed at both men and women that affects women more adversely than others. So I'm going to skip ahead for just a minute and talk about this case that came out of Alaska, and it was a case of a union. It was a union business office. So it had a union business agent in it. It was a teachers union, and it had a business agent and all the administrative staff in this office. And the union rep, the union business agent, the guy who ran this union, this office, was a bully. I mean, and beyond bully. I mean, the guy was extreme. Screamed, yelled, threw. I mean, there was items in the case law where he threw staplers at his staff. He threw whatever he could get his hands on at his staff. Intimidated, just loud, and when they finally called, when one of the women in the office finally called him on it and filed a claim, it went to investigation, it went to court, and he's like, hey, look, you know, so what? I'm a bad manager, but there's nothing wrong with bullying. It's not illegal. I can do it. And he was absolutely correct. All right. So as they continued with the investigation in this, they interviewed all the staff to find out if any one individual or any groups were being disenfranchised over another. And he interviewed all the women. They interviewed all the women. And women like, yes, this is what he does. He screams and yells. He throws stuff at us. He threatens us. He intimidates us. It's just unbelievable. It's severe. It's pervasive. We can't get away from it. We don't want to come into work. Okay, on and on and on. Almost to a person. And the women interviewed the men. Yeah, it's pervasive. It's severe. It happens all the time. He's in our face all the time. He throws things at us. But what was interesting was as they interviewed the men, to a person, the men all said, come to think of it, he does it more to the women than he does to us as a group. At that moment, at that juncture, it went from simple bullying, which is not illegal, to illegal harassment, because he was disenfranchising a gender, a protected class. And he lost a lot over that one, as did the labor union from the lawsuit. So we have to be real cognizant of what we do with bullying. We'll talk more about bullying in a minute.
You would almost think throwing a stapler at somebody would be assault, though.
Well, it would be if you hit him.
I kept him assault.
Other examples of gender-specific hostile work environment is widespread sexual favoritism. So sufficiently widespread sexual favoritism that conveys the message that the way women can get ahead in the workplace is by engaging in sexual conduct with a person in power. Isolated instance of favoritism on the part of a supervisor toward an employee with whom the supervisor is having a consensual affair, generally not sexual harassment. This is why I made that comment earlier. And this is the crux of this case I'm working on right now. It was a consensual relationship in the workplace. Unfortunately, he was her boss. And so this is the reason why I'm a firm believer that, one, they have no place in the workplace. Two, if they occur, and they occur between a supervisor and a subordinate, all right, then the powers to be or the board need to have enough policy in place to do something about that. Because that creates all kinds of problems in the workplace, not just what could happen if the relationship fails, but how all the other people, all the other employees see it. Because I guarantee you, everyone else, whether it's happening or not, sees it as favoritism. All right? That person gets to be late more often. That person has a more flexible schedule than I do. I mean, on and on and on. It's never ending. So these I struggle with, and it's good as a company to have safeguards in place for them. Tough to do. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's creates problems. Number 7, what is not an example of hostile environment sexual harassment? Witnessing the harassment of coworker, receiving sexually explicit emails from a supervisor, a man who tells a subordinate that he or she must spend Friday night with the supervisor to get a promotion.
C.
Okay, very good. Why?
Because that's the other kind.
And very good. It's quid pro quo. Okay, so C is quid pro quo. A and B are just examples of a hostile work environment. Okay. Doing okay?
Yep.
All right. So how do the courts measure it? Harassment is not based on the intent of the harasser. Instead, it is based upon the perception of the victim. And this is not Paul's judgment. This is right out of the court, the case law, at the federal level and at the state level. So it doesn't really matter when we get through the investigation and we go into the court system. It doesn't really matter what the alleged harasser says. You know, I didn't mean it. That wasn't my intent. That wasn't what I was going to do. It was, you know, this is what he did to me. And so it's that perception that weighs more heavily in the court systems than my intent. It's based on a reasonable person standard. Don't even get me started on how the court systems evaluate this, because I could canvass all of you in this room, and I'm either going to have a lot of reasonable people or none. And so it's based on, again, case law as opposed to what's in front of the judge at that time. And it says remarks or actions may not intend to hurt anyone, but if they have that effect, then they're considered to be harassment.
In the 80s and 90s, we were actually cautioned not to compliment and tell a woman she looks nice. That's how far extreme it had gotten at one point until a reasonable standard came back in.
Right. And we're going to see that in a minute. We have some case law that talks about that. It's kind of interesting.
I think I've been going to these classes too.
Yeah. All right, so Tim, again, you answered your question earlier. In order to make it illegal, these are some of the parameters, all right? So it has to be severe or pervasive, all right? So give me an example of a hostile work environment that is so severe that it would rise to the level of illegal harassment, sexual harassment. Come on, Robert, you can do it. All right.
Motorboating.
Motorboating, okay? Absolutely. You know, if I touch a female employee on the shoulder, it may be unwelcome. She may not like it, okay? But it's not severe, all right? If I do it every day, 3 times a day, and she keeps telling me to stop, then it's pervasive, okay? You know, an extreme case is if I walk up and grab a breast. That's severe, all right? And that would rise to the level immediately as to what the problem is, okay? All right, pervasive is I just don't stop. It just keeps coming and coming and coming, and I never stop doing it despite what they tell me, or despite even if they don't tell me, I perceive, but I just continue to do it. That's a problem. So those are 2 standards that the court systems will use to determine whether or not this claim is illegal harassment. Okay, so here's some definition of what is not sexual harassment, because I haven't heard it yet, but somebody usually says, well, geez, you just took all the fun out of coming to work every day. And that's not my intent, nor is it the law's intent. And so it's not a civility code. The Act doesn't prohibit usual social interaction. We need that. We need social human interaction. Okay? But I guarantee you, if I hug somebody in the workplace, I better be asking permission first, just to make sure that it's not inappropriate. Because some people love it, and some people hate it. And that's not gender-based. That's just personality styles. Okay? All right. Stray remarks, simple teasing, isolated incidents that aren't serious and consensual relationships. And even though it says consensual relationships, if you can steer clear of them, and I know that we're humans, so it happens.
But until something like this is brought to somebody's attention, that changes everything.
Well, it does, because the law...
Well, that's just the way this person is. They tease a lot.
Right.
Until somebody comes in and says, geez, that's offensive to me.
Sure. And my...
It becomes something else.
Exactly. But my preference is that the person who's offended by that goes to the individual who says that. Don't go file a claim. That's not what we want to encourage. We want to encourage our employees to stand up and say, whoa, time out, Bubba.
Well, that's generally your first comment is, well, did you talk to him about it?
Right, exactly.
You know?
And a lot of times employees will say, no, I don't want that conflict. I don't want to create problems. And you're right. Part of the policy is that I need you to tell them that this is inappropriate.
With you saying that, the one thing that I would bring up, and as managers we need to know, if one of your employees comes to you and says, I just want to tell you that this is going on and it really offends me, but I don't want you to do anything about it, I just needed to get it off your chest.
Too late.
You can't just say, oh, well, great, glad you told me. If you know, you have to take it. You have to move on it, and HR should know.
Yeah, because
Then if something happened, that could be a lawsuit against the supervisor, because, well, I told my supervisor,
right.
you know.
And it also looks as though the company did nothing when they had that information.
And I will tell you, 9 times out of 10, and I think as supervisors you know that too, an employee that does come to us and complain, that's what they really want to do is just tell you, but they really don't want you to do anything about it. And
Don't want to make a big deal about it.
that's right. And then when you tell them that we have to, they kind of go, oh my gosh, and they turn white as ghost and realize, gosh, I shouldn't maybe have brought
I was
it
just
up.
kidding, I gotta go.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But once it's said, it's said.
sure. And and again, my preference is to educate employees so that they feel comfortable in saying, Robert, I struggle with what you just said to me. And I know not everybody in the room is comfortable with that because it's conflict. And we know how much people love conflict. But for the most part, if we're going to have a working relationship with a colleague, we have to be comfortable enough to say, Justin, that's not in my best interest. I'm struggling with it. How can we have this conversation differently? So that's where I'd love for it to start. But you're right, it rarely does it start there. So,
Hey, Michelle, she did great back with matches. I was just gonna ask if you'd done running.
So at this juncture, in the back of the manuals, there's a green page, and it's two-sided. So if you guys would go there, everybody, for a minute. So here's what we're going to do. For the three of you in the outlying areas, sorry, I keep looking at the screen instead of the camera, but I need the eye contact. I'm struggling here. So if you would just do the first page that starts with Sonia Wilson. Read through it. For Ron, for you and your group, you talk about it after you've read through it. For the other of you two, you're just going to have to kind of absorb it and see what you think. For you guys, let's take this side of the room. We're going to split you right in half. Okay, we're going to take this side of the room and we'll do the first page, and this side of the room and do the other side of the page. Read through it, and then we'll talk about it. So it'll take a little bit of time to do that. Is the town on fire?
People are burning fields, and they have a great track record out here for
It's about an hour early today, though. Usually it's around 3.
Fire department hasn't lost a foundation yet, though. So.
Sweet. Okay, so let's start with the first one. And Ron, what did you guys talk about in Ennis?
Well, we talked about, first off, Sonia Wilson didn't tell her employer, her boss, that she didn't like what he was saying or she was offended by it. And it doesn't really come to a point about an offensive, derogatory comments. So we're kind of thinking that it wouldn't be sexual harassment. But if she did say that I don't appreciate you talking about my appearance, then it would be harassment if he continued.
Okay, so did you guys have a different opinion or the same opinion in this room here? What do you think?
I don't know, when you read through the whole thing, you must not have commented on Susan Morris's, but maybe she didn't look good, I don't know.
That,
Only compliment on just her.
He did, okay.
Tell the guy, hey, you look nice today.
okay, so there's a couple things happening here. Ron identified the fact that, one, the Sonia didn't come forward and say, "Whoa, you know, boss, I appreciate how you were raised. I appreciate that you're trying to be courteous. Please don't do that with me. And I struggle with it for these reasons. It has nothing to do with you. It's just, here's why I struggle with this, and I'd prefer not to be singled out in that fashion," right? So is that what you were getting at, Ron?
Yes.
Okay, so she didn't set the precedent there. Okay, so despite that, all right, despite that, was the issue here severe?
No.
Okay.
No.
Was it pervasive?
No.
Okay. Did it happen more than once?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So in her mind, potentially it was constant. It was pervasive. It happened too much. Now there's one other item here in the last paragraph.
Raymond Curtis is jealous.
Yeah, that's quite possible. And you just brought into a big piece of this is there, as many people as you got in the room, you have different opinions on this. That's what makes this stuff so challenging. But he says, yes, I think complimenting women on their appearance is sexual harassment. No, it's not sexual harassment. Only if it's unwelcome and pervasive or severe does it rise to that level. Okay? It's clearly discriminating between women and men because of the stereotypes about women. So you're right. He didn't say, you know, Dave, you look great today. Okay, nice shirt, man. He didn't. But for him, it was a cultural issue, or so he says. Right. So at the end of the day, because we don't know whether it's not offensive or offensive, at the end of the day, what's the rule of thumb here with this case?
She was offended.
She was offended because she said so. All right? And so that's what we get to take to the bank. She failed by not talking to him. He failed by maybe not recognizing it. And so there was more than anything just a lack of communication at that level. Real easy fix, right? This one wasn't hard. All right. You guys had a tough one. All right. So before we go on to it, why don't the rest of you read the second page so that at least you have an idea of what this group's going to talk about before they talk about it. So take a few minutes and read the second page. Okay, so let's take this paragraph by paragraph. So what did you guys identify were the problems with this little scenario? Okay, so yeah, there's a problem there. What else?
Well, you picked on the women more than the men.
Okay, and somebody identified that, didn't they? As you read down, one of the employees said, yeah, he's a jerk, but he's really targeting a gender. Okay, so there's a first clue that is a problem. What else?
He's got an accomplice in Jason Black. Jason really sort of
Defends him?
yeah.
Yeah. Now, so the employee was worthless. Is that how we work with a worthless employee? Right. I mean, the other problem that they had was, he said that she was worthless, and he just hoped that he could be hard enough on her that she would go away. In Montana, we refer to that as constructive discharge. That's a whole other thing from harassment that we don't want to play in that sandbox either. What are some of the telltales with this one, though? What are the biggies? What was severe?
Well, he left a bruise.
Yeah, yeah. Not only did he prove it in doing it with his wife, who was an employee, by the way, he did it with a subordinate. He physically touched and left marks on a subordinate. Okay, so we don't need to worry about pervasive in this case. That was severe enough to not only be harassment, but probably report to the police as well. Okay, anything else?
What about hostile work environment?
Yeah, that's basically what this comes down to. This is gender-based hostile work environment. Okay. All right. So was this one pretty clear cut?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Very good. Guys, any questions from your perspective? Just nod or shake your head. Okay. Cool. All right. So we're gonna watch a video. Will they be able to see this?
Yes.
Okay. I have to figure out how to run it.
I'm Sarah. I'm a college graduate.
What did you do here? Look at this! What, are you stupid or something?
Top of my class. I'm a mother.
Sarah, come over here. Come on. I won't bite you.
I'm a single mother.
What are you doing after work?
I'm a professional.
Sarah, get us some coffee, please. Black, thanks.
I'm a human being.
She's frigid. What? I asked her out 4 or 5 times. Nothing.
Maybe she's not interested, John.
Phil, she's an icebox. Believe me.
I don't deserve this. No one does.
Ice. Being called stupid is harassing.
It's interesting to look at this scenario when you study the behavior of Phil, because you could look at it and say, well, this behavior doesn't seem to be based on her gender necessarily. It's not based upon race. It's not directly related to religion. So therefore, perhaps it isn't harassment. And yet this is the perfect example when you can look at the behavior. It's intimidating behavior, it's humiliating behavior, and it's clearly impacting her in her work environment. And that's harassment.
The best thing to do is to let him know, first of all, what he's doing. A lot of people who say these kinds of things don't even hear themselves saying the words.
When Sarah confronts Phil and John, it's important that she uses I statements. She needs to communicate them about how she feels about their behavior. It's very important that she not use you statements. You statements will be judgments about them. You, Phil, are a jerk because you don't appreciate my value in the workplace. You, John, are a sexist pig because you keep asking me out.
If Sarah had spoken to John or Phil or both of them, and they're kind of shrugging it off, her next step is to take it to her immediate supervisor or manager.
You need to have channels developed where the victim
the person that believes they are being harassed has somebody else they can talk to about it in the workplace that is able to take effective and appropriate action.
She has a choice whether or not she wants the behavior to stop, and it will only stop if she takes some action. And that action can be confronting the individuals herself or going to someone else in the organization to help her do that.
What did you do here? Look at this! What, are you stupid or something?
No, I'm not stupid. I made a mistake, Phil, which means I'm human. And when you call me stupid, I feel like I have no value. I want you to apologize.
Don't be so sensitive. Okay, I'm sorry.
Please don't do it again.
Not everyone would feel comfortable confronting Phil in this way. It's okay to handle an incident like this in a manner that reflects your own communication style. However, there are certain guidelines you should keep in mind. First, you need to let the person who is harassing or offending you know how you feel about the behavior. Try using the when, I feel, I need or want formula.
Hey, Sarah, come over here. Come on, I won't bite you.
Hi, John.
What are you doing after work?
Look, when you keep asking me out, it really makes me feel uncomfortable. I need you to stop.
Now, I could choose to see the impact of my behavior here and back off. No. Sarah, you don't need me to stop. Are you, frigid or something?
Second, you need to set boundaries in a way that is respectful. Unless you're feeling physically threatened, it usually doesn't help to shout, call the other person names, or embarrass him or her, even if you want to.
Look, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but I'm just not interested. This is work. My private life is private, so please don't ask me out anymore. And don't call me names, okay?
What if it's not okay?
Then I'll have no choice but to bring this to management. That's not a threat, John. I will do it.
Finally, if the behavior doesn't stop, get help. Report the incident and your concerns to a supervisor or to the appropriate person in human resources. Don't think the behavior will go away by itself. It probably won't.
Oops. Bear with me. Technically challenged.
Many of the people at work happen. Ben's our resident clown.
Yo, Steve, who's this?
Not funny, Ben.
Everyone's a critic. Come on, Steve. Was it funny? It was funny, right?
I've seen worse. Let's go, folks. We've got work to do.
Hey, Viv, wait a second. Hey, no offense, okay? It was just a joke. Look, I know the last 22 times I've asked you, you didn't want to go out.
Ben, I really
But this
don't...
time, I think I've got it. Listen. The ballet. 5th row, center. These are $60 tickets. And I'll even throw in dinner.
Thanks, but I really...
No, a real dinner. Something that you like. Barbecue. Fried chicken. Chitlins. Hush puppies. Watermelon for dessert.
Do you think this impresses me?
I hope so.
No. And please don't ask again.
There's no question that Viv was being harassed. He had asked her out many, many times. She had said no. That was the sexual part of the harassment. But further, he was engaging in continuous stereotyping of African Americans in addition to that.
This scenario is a perfect depiction of the difference between Ben's intent and the impact of his behavior. He's not intending to harass Viv, quite the opposite. He's hoping to get a date with her. And yet the impact of the behavior is perceived as harassment.
Steve's responsibilities include first addressing the problem in an assertive and affirmative manner.
It's also important that managers educate employees on the issue of harassment. What is acceptable behavior and what is not acceptable behavior. The education is important not only so employees know what they should or should not do, but it's also important because if I've been an employee subjected to inappropriate behavior, I know my supervisor's stance on it. I know I can go to my supervisor and he or she will take the issue seriously.
That's why it's important for managers and supervisors to serve as role models.
When they hear about a situation, they need to do immediate follow-up and investigation. They need to get professional help with that very often, and not simply do it alone, but to get the help to make sure that the investigation is done properly.
The manager or the supervisor is the company. You are the person, you are the one on the front line, and if you don't stop it, and nobody else stops it, the company is liable. And in some jurisdictions, you, as the supervisor or manager, may have personal liability as well.
Steve not only failed to stop the harassment here, he played into it. He responded to Ben's remarks and sent the message to Viv that the behavior was acceptable.
Yo, Steve, who's this?
Not funny, Ben.
Everyone's a critic. Hey, come on, Steve. Was it funny? It was funny, right?
Ben, could I talk with you for a second? We'll catch up with you, Ben. Ben, it wasn't funny.
I think I'm in trouble. Not you, too. What does a guy have to do to get a laugh around here?
I found what you did offensive, and it was particularly insensitive to Viv.
Yep, troubled. Hey, I like Viv. I wouldn't hurt her. Well, I might tie her up or something, but she'd probably enjoy it. Hey, it's a joke, Steve.
Good, you opened the topic up. That'll make this a bit easier. That's another thing I wanted to talk to you about, Ben. I've noticed you're pretty aggressive trying to get a date with Viv.
Yeah, I'm getting nowhere. You have any ideas?
Ben, this isn't a pickup line. Once an employee lets you know she isn't interested, that's the end of it. You keep after her like that and you'll end up in a harassment complaint.
Harass? Oh, very good, Steve. You had me there for a minute.
No joke, Ben. It would be best if you kept your relationship with Viv strictly professional.
You mean like
charge her for my services. You know what I mean. I'm making a note of this conversation and putting it in your file. If you keep asking Viv out, or making jokes at her expense, or if you retaliate against her in any way, I'll take disciplinary action. Please, Ben, take this seriously, okay?
Okay, enough. All right, thoughts on either one of those?
Retaliate was something that hasn't been mentioned, and I think that's a good one too.
It is, and we're gonna come to retaliation. But since Bonnie brought it up, when we look at case law in Montana in particular, the percentage of cases that are brought before the court systems in regards to harassment are not proven. In other words, they're not proven for the employee, the higher percentage. Unfortunately, the court cases we see that come back into the court systems on that same offense are lost by the employer because of retaliation. So what's happened is they've won the harassment suit, but they don't do anything about the manager who was causing the problem in the first place, or the employee that was creating a problem, or the other employees. They all talk about it. I mean, and so what happens is we end up with some form of retaliation, or retaliation is perceived by that individual. And a high percentage of those cases that came back into the court systems were lost by the employer. And so when we find this in the workplace, in our organizations, and then we do something about it. Part of doing something about it is to ensure that that individual doesn't do it again. That individual doesn't somehow retaliate against the individual or the individuals that filed the claim in the first place. When we conduct our investigations, we begin and end with, don't talk about this. Because if you do, we can't keep you from, it's your right to talk about it, but we're asking you not to. Because if you do, here's what could happen. And if you end up being found guilty of retaliation, it will probably result in your termination. And so, we make sure that they understand what retaliation looks like. So that's, anything else on that, Bonnie?
No.
Okay. All right. So here's harassment based on legally protected class, and here's the list of them again. All right. And this is in your this list is in your EEO statement, or your harassment statement, or your discrimination statement in your handbook. Okay. Question number 9 was reverse discrimination. African Americans discriminating against whites is illegal. True or false?
True.
Doesn't really matter, does it? Okay. If they find it to be a class or a group that was disenfranchised, it's illegal harassment. Okay. Same concepts as with sexual harassment. The harasser as well as the victim may be of any ethnic or religious background, age, gender, mental, physical ability. Okay. The harasser can be a supervisor, subordinate, co-worker, client, customer, or vendor. And the victim may be an employee or a client. So it holds the same concepts. Examples: unwelcome remarks and jokes, taunting based on protected class. Segregation. What is segregation? In the workplace, what does segregation look like?
Leaving them out, basically.
Okay.
Segregating them from the group, not including them.
Okay. So we don't like somebody. They're a pain in our butt.
Purposely not sharing information.
Right. And see, that's the problem is when I segregate somebody, they can't do their jobs effectively because they need to be part of the focus, part of the group, part of the team. To get the same information as everybody else. And when I segregate them because I don't like them, instead I should be disciplining them to either improvement or termination. But instead I just disenfranchise them. And so that's a good definition of segregation. And it happens a whole lot more than we know in the workplace.
So if they choose to segregate themselves, it's more of a disciplinary
It is.
issue.
Right. And all of it comes down to what's the problem? To communication, to asking the question, and then fixing whatever it might be, whether it's on my end or theirs. No. Insulting gestures, practical jokes based on protected class, display of racist or offensive materials, unwelcome inquiries or comments about an individual's personal life, and any unwelcome behavior based on protected class. Okay, same thing. It needs to be unwelcome, and the conduct needs to be severe and pervasive. Sorry, Tim.
Yeah, it's all right. I got you.
Okay, I'm moving around. And so those are the same things as sexual harassment. All right, frequency and severity of the conduct. Threatening. Is it threatening? Is it humiliating? What is the context in which it occurred? Is it hostile or patently offensive? Okay, and that again is in the eye of the beholder. Question number 10, harassing conduct must be racial in nature in order to be illegal harassment. That's a tough one. Okay, that's false. Why?
There's all kinds of different harassment.
It needs to be based on race. Okay, not necessarily racial in nature. All right. So it says here that conduct need not to be explicitly racial in nature, but race must be the reason that the work environment is hostile. Okay. all African Americans were segregated in my workplace because we didn't like them. So that's what we did. All right? It was based on race. Okay? Now, if I decided that I didn't like African Americans and I told ethnic jokes, when does that become a hostile work environment or harassment?
When it's perceived as
Unwelcome,
unwelcome.
severe, or pervasive. Okay, very good. All right. When we talk about bullying, right, these statistics are a little bit old, but it says 80% of women and 20% of men surveyed had been bullied in the workplace at some point. 80% of women. 37% of targets were terminated, and 33% quit. Okay, so if this was not a problem in the workplace, why would it be a problem in our schools? Because our children just don't come up with this stuff. They learn it from somebody, do they not? Okay, it's like racism. We're not born to be racists. We're taught to be racists, and so it's a big deal in the school systems. They got all kinds of education going on about it, and programs that they pay people to come in to teach the kids what bullying is about, and they learn it from us, from their parents, and so we have to be real cognizant of the fact that it's not illegal unless it disenfranchises a protected class, but it's just not appropriate in the workplace. True or false? There are no laws prohibiting bullying in the workplace so long as the bullying is not based on the person's protected class.
True.
Okay, true. All right. I'm not sure how I feel about this because I think we're over policed and over legislated already. But give it time. Somebody somewhere will create legislation that makes this illegal as well. Examples of harassment not based on a protected class. Falsely accusing someone of making errors. Intimidation, and the attorney said it on the videos. The silent treatment or withholding information, same as segregation. Inappropriate displays of anger. Stealing credit for work done by others, humiliation, put-downs, insults, criticism. Unsigning undesirable work, making unreasonable demands, and ensuring failure of a person's work. All right. Again, these all have to rise to the same level. They have to be found to be unwelcome by somebody. They have to be severe or pervasive in some level, or they have to be disenfranchising someone of a protected class. And then here's the component we talked about earlier that Bonnie raised, is retaliation. We just have to make really sure that if we go through this in our workplace, if it's brought forth, if we've dealt with it in some fashion, that everybody involved, from me through HR, through the supervisor, to that employee, to the colleagues that knew about it, understand that this is not something we get to just chat about. Okay? That because if we chat about it and somebody takes it the wrong way, there are potential for retaliation. And or if the manager who is accused of it is still employed with us, I got to keep very close tabs on that individual because they might be pissed off about it, rightly or wrongly, and they may try to do something about it. So we have to be real cognizant of that. All right? All right. How many of you, you don't have to answer this question, I already know. How many of you were in the military? Okay. There's a concept that we need to be able to relay to our employees about saying no. How many of you remember the little problem the Navy got into, referred to as the tailhook scandal? Damn squids. Okay. Where this whole thing came from was in the late 1970s and into the early 80s was the first time that women, outside of the Second World War, okay, first time that women got to fly combat aircraft, right, as a career. And it was relatively new, and I'm here to tell you that many of the male pilots didn't like it. Okay, this is a man's world. Don't screw with this. All right? You're gonna mess it up. They didn't care for it. And so in order for the women pilots to be successful as pilots in the program, they went through a lot of crap. They went through bullying, they went through harassment, they went through sexual harassment on a regular basis. That was part of the gig. If they wanted to fly, that's what you got to do. It was condoned by the Navy. Known about and condoned. And finally, when one female pilot had had enough, and she filed a claim, that claim went through the military justice system all the way to the Secretary of the Navy. And you know, it's kind of like telling Dad. You don't want Dad to know. And so what happened was a total reorganization of that whole program within the Navy. And what came out of it was some very severe training for all pilots. Okay, not just the male pilots, but all pilots had to go through it. And what they did was they turned it into a system where if someone felt as though they were being harassed at whatever level, okay, and of course this was geared towards the female pilots, that they only had to say one thing, and the training was drilled into everybody well enough that they got it the first time, hopefully. All right, and they used the stoplight. They used the stoplight system, yellow and red. All right. So if I'm being harassed and I'm not liking it very much, okay, basically all I had to do as a female pilot was say yellow light. I didn't have to say I don't like this. I didn't have to say stop this. I just said yellow light. And what that told that male pilot was, whoops, I just crossed the line. And I know I crossed the line. I mean, I need to stop. Okay. Now if it continued, which it did at the beginning, the female pilot just had to say red light. Guess what happened to that male pilot's career as a pilot? Done. Okay? That's how severe they took it in the Navy. So that was the result of that. And so the reason why I tell this story, folks, is because it's real important that we, as managers, we can't do it all. We can't fix it all the time. Okay? That's not our burden. Our burden is to create the environment and let the rest of the folks get the job done. Right? So we need to take that to the same level with harassment. We need to enable our employees to fix it themselves, which means we have to get them comfortable with the potential for conflict. We have to get them comfortable with saying, please don't do that again. All right? That I struggle with that, and you don't need to know why I struggle with that. I just struggle with it, so don't do it. Okay? So that's the key. And don't take it on yourselves. Enable them to be able to do that. Now, granted, 75% of your employees won't do it. They're afraid to. They're unwilling. They think it's your job.
Or they'll have somebody else do it for them.
Yeah, and we all know where that goes. So, so work with your employees. When they come to you, obviously, take it seriously. Help them with it. All right? But the first question I'm going to say is, did you tell John about that? When John said that to you, did you tell him that you struggle with that? All right? No, I didn't. Well, how come? So put it back on their plate, if you would. I think that's a good start. When's the last time the policy was reviewed? Has it been a while? When's the last time we did your handbook? I haven't seen it for a while. Doesn't mean one of my colleagues hasn't.
11.
Yeah.
Well, it's changed. I'll go grab it.
Okay, because we have a whole new policy, redrafted by one of our attorneys, probably because they needed a new car. But we've wrapped harassment and discrimination together into a single policy, so that they're all one. But it's real important that all of you know what those policies say from time to time as a group, Dave, I would recommend that you pull out the more severe ones like that, and just take 5 minutes and review it, and just make sure everybody knows where you're living on it. So, okay. Let's just talk for the last minute here about liability. Okay. If the employee suffers a tangible detriment, what is a tangible detriment? Ron, what's a tangible detriment?
No idea.
Good answer. Okay. Right. Tangible is I can touch it, I can get my arms around it. Detriment means I've lost something. All right. So I've lost it. I lost my job. I lost the potential for a promotion. I was demoted somewhere along the way. Okay. My pay was decreased. Right. If any of these things have to do with what we talked about here today, okay, it's an automatic go to jail card. And the employer simply gets out the checkbook and writes a check. That's how it works. Don't even try to fight it. You'll spend more on your attorneys. All right. So the employer is strictly liable, and the court systems have made it that way. All right. If the harassment is by a supervisor or a manager and the employee suffers no tangible detriment, nothing happened to them other than they didn't like it, it was unwelcome, it was severe or pervasive, okay, the employer is liable unless they exercise reasonable care to prevent or correct the harassment. So what's reasonable care to correct or prevent harassment? So give me a couple.
Putting policies.
Okay, training. So self-inflicted training, policies. Okay, what's the other one here that goes with this?
Discipline the offender.
All right, so I need to take corrective action. So when it happens, I need to take it seriously, investigate it, and then take corrective action for whatever comes forward. Okay, and the complainant failed to avail him or herself of the employee's preventive measures. Okay, so I can't rely upon this one, but it is an affirmative defense. In other words, if they filed a claim and they didn't take advantage of the own policy in the first place, then you may not have as big of a liability as an organization. Okay, this comes right out of the court systems. Harassment or hostile work environment caused by a non-manager or supervisor. An employer may be liable if they knew or should have known. All right, and that's the really hard part. Lots of times we know and don't do anything about it, but what if we don't know? All right. The court system said tough. As an employer, you should have known this was occurring. I know, I get the looks all the time. And so if you have these affirmative defenses, if you have a policy, if you have consistent training, if you enforce that training, that's the should have known component. Okay?
It was 09.
09.
We don't have a specific sexual harassment, we have a conduct, and it is part of that.
Okay.
About any harassment or hostile work environment at all.
Okay.
We went very, very non-specific
Okay.
with this policy rather than being, a lot in one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me know. We'll talk about it. I mean, it's probably time that we looked at that anyway.
Okay.
So send it over, and we can go through the whole policy, and we'll recommend something for you. Obviously, you're going to want your attorney to bless it anyway.
Right.
So.
Okay.
Okay. That pretty much does it for us. Are there any comments or concerns about what we talked about? I'll be honest, this is the biggest hurdle for most of us. I didn't mean to do that. I'm sorry, it wasn't offensive to me. So, okay. Guys, anything from your end? And ladies,
you did a fine job, Paul.
Why, thank you. It was one of my more fun subjects yet again, Ron.
All right, good job.
Thanks. So, okay. Bonnie, Dave, Robert, anything you guys want to add?
Just don't do it.
Okay. Yeah. The opposite of the Nike commercial. Just don't do it.
Yeah.
That and the fact that I can't get the song out of my head. Red light, yellow light, green light.
Wow.
I can't get it.
Thanks, guys.